All right, so let's say I've got this younger brother, Jake, right? And for some weird reason, he's just not into me. You might guess, could it be jealousy? But nah, that's not it. In our house, if there's a favorite, it's definitely Jake, not me. So, jealousy is off the table. Here's the scoop. My mom practically rolls out the red carpet for Jake. She cooks his favorite meals, keeps his clothes spotless, and she even nudges me to help him with his homework. It's like, because he's my brother, I'm expected to be on call for him. But when I need a hand, it's like I'm talking to the walls. Nobody's rushing to help me out. I kind of just shrugged it off and didn't kick up a fuss. I'm pretty self-reliant, so I figured, hey, what's the harm in playing along? Maybe I thought things would somehow balance out. But here's the thing. Jake barely ever lifts a finger to help me. He only pops up when he needs something from me. So growing up, I was the quiet type who liked to stick to my books and just do my own thing. My brother, on the other hand, was a lot like my dad. Pretty loud and always in the middle of some action. I've always been the kind of person who says what I think, straight up, without making things sound nicer than they are. I guess because of this, my mom started to see me in a not-so-great light. And yep, you guessed it. This made my brother the golden boy in everyone's eyes. Back then, I didn't really care much about all that. But things got a bit rough when he decided it was fun to pick on me for being different. He'd make fun of my height, tease me about my glasses, and even sneak into my room to read my diary. Then he'd go off and tell my mom about anything I wrote down. It felt like he was always looking for ways to make me the odd one out. Whenever he crossed the line, like sneaking into my space or messing with my stuff, I'd lose it and go straight to our parents, hoping they'd see my side. But nope, they'd just wave it off, chuckling about how it wasn't a big deal. Things got worse, though. He almost wrecked my glasses once and even messed with my food. One time, he put pebbles in my stereo. Luckily, I caught that one in time, or it could have ended badly for my teeth. I tried talking to my mom about it, thinking maybe she'd get how serious this was, but she just shrugged it off with a, "That's how brothers bond." Every time Jake and I would get into it, he knew exactly which buttons to press, hitting all my insecurities hard. And since we went to the same school, he knew all about the kids who were bullying me. Instead of having my back, he'd side with them, making things even tougher for me. He took things way too far, joining in with those bullies at school, calling me awful names like the ugly loser or hairy monkey. He even egged them on to get physical with me, all because he saw me as nothing but a big failure. There was this one time we got into an argument over something so trivial I can't even remember what it was about. But what I do remember is how it ended, with him telling me to kill myself. Most insults I could shake off, but not that one. It hit me hard because I was already dealing with some pretty tough stuff mentally at that time. Thankfully, I'm in a much better place now. But back then, it was devastating to think my own brother wanted me gone. With dad always at work, and mom not really tuning into how serious things were, it felt like I was on my own. Once, mom even told me off, saying it was my fault for provoking him. Things just kept getting worse as we got older. There was this one crazy moment in high school when he actually tried to burn my hair. Can you believe that? And to make matters even more unbelievable, my mom actually took his side, saying he was just playing around. I mean, who does that kind of stuff for fun? Luckily, that was the moment my dad stepped in. He was not having any of it and made it clear that this behavior was way out of line. He even went as far as threatening to call the police on Jake, which was a huge wake-up call for him. Until that point, it seemed like he could do no wrong in my parents' eyes, so this was a major shock to him. My dad didn't stop there. He sat Jake down and laid it out straight. Enough was enough, and it was high time he started showing some respect towards me, his older brother. Then, something I never expected happened. My dad came to talk to me in my room. It was surprising because all through our growing up, he'd always been pointing out how similar he and Jake were, which was pretty much true. When my dad told me he had been waiting for Jake to outgrow his immaturity and didn't realize until now that he was actually becoming a big bully, it was like a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. Finally, someone saw what I was going through and believed me. I nearly cried from relief. I poured out my heart to him, telling him all the things Jake had done and how I was also being bullied at school. Dad was really taken aback by everything I had been enduring. The very next day, he made a point to talk to the principal at our school to ensure that my bullies knew they'd face serious consequences if they kept it up. But he didn't stop there. That evening, he signed me up for mixed martial arts classes at the local gym. He said it was time for me to man up and learn how to stand up to the bullies in my life. It was a whole new chapter for me, one where I started to learn not just how to defend myself, but also to build confidence in who I am. Sure, at first glance, someone might have thought it was pretty funny seeing a nerdy kid like me trying to get the hang of fighting in those mixed martial arts classes. But here's the thing. I get super focused when I really want to learn something new, so I made sure to squeeze in time for working out and attending those classes, even with all my studying. And let me tell you, it wasn't just for kicks. It totally transformed both my life and my body. I'm not trying to boast, but the difference was night and day. Then there was this one day when Jake decided to pull his old tricks again. This time he swiped my pocket money, the cash I'd earned by helping out our parents with chores around the house. I'd been saving up for quite a while, and he just snuck into my room and took it. I caught him just as he was about to take off on his bike with his friends. I stood my ground and demanded my money back, making it clear to him that stealing was wrong, fully expecting him to push back or make a run for it. Jake, thinking he could get under my skin as usual, just snickered and threw that old taunt my way, saying all I ever did was run to Dad for help. Something just snapped in me at that moment, and before I knew it, I had landed a solid punch right on his face. He was so shocked that he stumbled and fell backward onto the ground. Quickly, I grabbed him, fished my money out of his pocket, and then, without a second thought, I let him fall back down. The sight of him crying on the ground, loud and clear like a little kid, was almost funny. There he was, a teenage boy bawling over being hit. But then, my mom came dashing out, all worried, ready to scoop up her baby boy and find out what had gone down. When she realized I had actually stood up to him and we had fought, she was more than just shocked. She started scolding me, probably not expecting me to ever fight back like that. My mom laid into me, saying that as the older brother, I was supposed to be setting a good example for Jake. All the while, Jake seemed to get a kick out of seeing me get a talking to. My mom didn't stop with just scolding me. She brought it to my dad's attention too, complaining about how I'd thrashed Jake and suggesting I needed to be reined in. My dad, with this serious look he gets, called us both to lay out what had happened. I laid it all out for my dad, how Jake had sneaked into my room and taken the money I'd earned and saved. Jake, on his part, tried to spin some story about needing the money for a date and that, as his brother, I should have been willing to help him out. But Dad wasn't having any of it. He told Jake straight up that he was lucky all he got was a punch for stealing. In the real world, stealing could land him in much hotter water, like having the police called on him. My dad made it crystal clear to Jake that taking things without permission was absolutely not okay, driving home the point that respect and consent are non-negotiable. Jake really didn't take well to being called out by Dad. He tried throwing a fit, probably hoping Mom would take his side like usual, but this time Dad stood his ground, making it clear he wasn't about to let Jake off easy. Seeing that there was no way he was going to win this one, and that I wasn't going to be punished for standing up to him, Jake lost it. He shouted how much he hated me and stormed off to his room, slamming the door shut behind him. From that day on, Jake kept his distance from me. It seemed like he finally got the message that he couldn't mess with me anymore, especially now that Dad wasn't playing favorites. For the first time, I felt like we were on equal footing. Jake might have stopped trying to physically intimidate me, but he didn't give up on being a pain. Whenever he knew we were out of earshot of our parents, he'd still throw verbal jabs my way. It seemed like, as he got older, his words only got sharper and meaner. It felt like each year he became angrier and had a shorter fuse. If I approached him to ask something, he would simply ignore me to my face and walk away out of the room, calling me a nerd or a loser under his breath. If he wanted to say something to me, he would only go through a mother who would relay the message. I would question my mother as to why Jake could not just talk to me if he wanted something, and she would implore me to be more understanding. I had no clue if this was just him going through puberty, and I had to wait it out, or if he actually truly hated me. I used to be able to deal with the things he would say over the years, but it got to a point where I just wanted to move out of home to get away from him. I would go to my mother countless times asking if she could mediate a sit-down conversation for all of us to talk it out, but she always refused, saying she didn't want to get involved. I even asked for her opinion on why he treated me that way, but she would just brush off the question. Eventually, I went away to my dream university since I was a grade A student, and was even qualified for a scholarship. My dad from a party for me and my mom seemed proud of me also. However, Jake remained aloof and distant, barely acknowledging my achievements. The day I left for university was a mix of excitement for the future and relief to escape the toxic environment at home. The first few months at the university were liberating, made new friends, enjoyed my classes, and started to build a life separate from the oppressive atmosphere I had experienced growing up. The constant fear of Jake's verbal attacks lifted, and I felt a newfound sense of peace. I began dating my wife Karen when we were both in the second year of our university. My friend introduced us at a frat party, and we clicked right away. Coming from a religious family, having kids without being married was a big no-no. However, we found out she was pregnant when we were in the last year of our university, which prompted us to get married as soon as we graduated. Our wedding was a small but peaceful ceremony. Our parents were happy for us, and we had a good time at our wedding. At that moment, I believed she was the love of my life. I always held the mindset that I wanted monogamy in life. One woman to come home to and be with for the long haul. Despite women trying to engage with me over the years, I never pursued anything because I was genuinely content in my marriage. Karen was my dream girl, and I never wanted to hurt her. However, over the years, there were two occasions when I discovered she was being unfaithful in our marriage. One was an affair that lasted a few years with her married coworker, and the other was a fling with an ex. She had dated in high school when she went to visit her family states away. I'm sure there will be people who might call me foolish, and looking back, I can't really deny it myself. After a period of separation in both situations, I made the decision to forgive my wife. I never wanted to raise my child in a broken home, and I genuinely believed we could overcome these challenges. We were quite young when the situation with her coworker occurred, so I chalked it up to youthful mistakes and not thinking things through. For a while, things seemed okay with us. I could never fully trust her, but I tried my best to push aside my doubts because I knew that if I chose to forgive her, I had to work towards moving past it and starting with a clean slate. It's been 4 years since the second time she was unfaithful, and I felt like I made the right decision by giving her a chance to show that she still wanted to be in our marriage. For years, Karen seemed to have changed, and we were genuinely happy with plans set in motion for the future of our family. However, 3 months ago, my reality was once again shattered by yet another incident, which in my mind was far worse than the others. When she revealed that she had been sleeping with someone for quite some time and suggested that our son might not even be mine, hearing her words, I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. A mix of shock, betrayal, and disbelief overwhelmed me. I struggled to comprehend the enormity of what she had just disclosed. In a daze, I managed to ask her why she had kept such a significant secret and how she could have done something so devastating. Her reaction was a cold and indifferent demeanor. She seemed detached, almost unbothered by the pain she had inflicted. Her responses were vague, leaving me with more questions than answers. It was a surreal and painful moment, confronting the shattered trust and the uncertainties about my own family. I continued to ask Karen to tell me the truth because I felt like I deserved to know the father of the child, since I had been literally raising our son since the beginning. In the end, she admitted that it was Jake. My eyes widened in shock as I asked her what exactly she meant by that. This is when Karen told me how she and Jake had become friends, back when I had introduced Karen to my family and she had stayed with us for Thanksgiving up until the New Year's. I remember Jake, who was usually cold to me, was quite polite and warm towards her. I was glad since I did not want to make Karen feel unwelcome. She wanted to be accepted into my family, so she would spend significant time hanging out with my mom whenever she could. She noticed that Jake and I were not that close and questioned me about it. I finally opened up to her about my childhood equation with Jake and told her how we might never be able to repair our relationship, since he never could move past his feelings. Karen understood. However, she started to include Jake whenever we would go out, perhaps hoping that both of us would warm up to each other if we were going to watch a movie. She would invite Jake, and then we would have to watch whatever movie Jake wanted to watch. I guess during this time, Jake and I did talk a few words here and there, which was a significant improvement compared to how he had been giving me the silent treatment for years. I do remember Karen and Jake would hang out and play video games together, but I never thought much about it. Karen told me how one day Jake opened up to her about his struggles and his recent breakup with his then ex-girlfriend. He seemed so vulnerable with her and they struck a friendship. She said how he would sometimes harmlessly flirt with her when I was not around, and apparently one thing led to another and she could not control herself anymore. I closed my eyes as the vision of my wife and brother sleeping together almost made me puke. She told me how guilty she felt after that and ran away from him. After that, she decided to go back home, which was true because my girlfriend had abruptly told me how she wanted to go back home when I thought she would be spending the New Year's with me. I tried to convince her to stay, but she was adamant that she had to go. After the holidays, when we met in college, once our classes resumed, she was back to her usual cheerful self, so I never questioned anything. 2 weeks after that, we found out that she was pregnant. Now, Karen told me that she had no idea whether it was really my child or Jake's, and she had no way to find proof because I was already stepping up. She knew out of the two I was a more dependable brother, so she decided to stay with me. And this is why we got married. I felt like my whole world was crashing down around me. The son I had loved and spent countless hours with may not even be mine. I questioned her if she had been sleeping with Jake in the present times, and she nodded slowly. Karen told me how she and Jake had always stayed in touch because their chemistry was undeniable. They would sneak off to hotel oaths when she would lie to me that she was working overtime. She told me how half of her business trips were just romantic getaways with him. I asked Karen why she would even be married to me if she really wanted my brother. But Karen told me how she did not want to be the one to break off a marriage, and seeing how I was such a wonderful father to our son. She had stayed with me all this while. In her words, she had made a mistake and she didn't know when to stop. I simply told Karen that I was glad that she told me the truth and that I was going to pack up and move out. Karen started to cry and asked for my forgiveness, telling me how I was supposed to scream and yell at her. But here I was calmly thinking of my next move. I remained quiet while I walked to my cupboard and started packing some of my clothes into my suitcase. Karen kept saying how if I really loved her, then I should try to at least fight for her, and mistakes happen in every marriage. When she realized that I was not going to do anything, she changed her tactic and told me how my son would be affected if we got a divorce and how children should not be brought up in a broken home. I reminded her how I may not even be a father, which then reduced her to tears, and she started to yell at me about being cruel and how I could easily walk away when I'd been there for the child since his birth. It seemed like my wife believed there was nothing that could make me want out of our marriage. I guess it was partly my fault for letting a loss slide in the past. While I did have some love for her, it felt more like it stemmed from the fact that I thought we had a son together and had been together since college. Karen continued to claim that it was not too late and that we could work things out, but I struggled to believe it and felt like I had no more patience to deal with her. Trust was a major issue for me, and her words felt empty. Even if I forgave her, I could never forget that she had slept with my own brother. I've always believed that people could make mistakes and be forgiven because we are all flawed. But this went beyond a certain limit. I left her crying on the doorstep and checked into a hotel. The next day, I went straight to my parents and told them everything about my wife's affair with Jake and how they had been sleeping together for years behind our backs. The shock on their faces was evident. My mother, true to her nature, initially tried to defend Jake, telling me that this could not be true, since her boy would never do something like this to his own brother. Determined to expose the truth, I requested my parents to remain silent and allow me to call Jake right in front of them. I told them to not make a sound, since this is how I could expose Jake's true colors. I wanted him to think that it was just a private conversation between us, so that he could hopefully let his guard down. As Jake picked up, I laid it onto him and confronted him with the revelation of his affair with my wife. Initially, he denied it vehemently and refused to accept it. Then, when I told him that Karen had admitted to everything, he started to blame Karen, labeling her as characterless. He told me that it was not his fault if women were attracted to him and that he was the better-looking brother. I told him firmly that I was going to expose him in front of everyone. When Jake mocked that, no one would believe me, and that he was the golden child anyway. I scoffed at his arrogance and thanked him for confirming the truth, since our parents had heard everything. Jake went quiet and then spluttered to explain himself, stumbling over his words in an attempt to salvage his image. My mother, still grappling with the shock, demanded an explanation from Jake. He started through a feeble attempt to justify his actions, blaming everyone else but himself, and desperately trying to shift the blame onto Karen. I could see my mother, who was once protective of her favored son, now felt a mix of disappointment and anger. In that charged moments, I felt a strange sense of vindication. For years, I had endured Jake's torment. Now the truth would come to light and the roles were reversed. It was Jake who stood exposed. His actions laid bare for everyone to see. As Jake's words faltered, my father, usually reserved in his expressions, couldn't contain his disappointment. He asked me to pass him the phone and went off on him. "Jake!" He began, his tone heavy with disapproval. "What you've done is not just a betrayal of your brother, but a betrayal of this family. You slept with your brother's wife and continued to sleep with her after they got married. Your actions have consequences, and they have irreversibly damaged the trust we had in you. I raised both of you to value family loyalty and decency. What you've shown today goes against everything I've tried to instill in you." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle on Jake's conscience. The disregard for your brother's feelings, the lack of respect for the sanctity of his marriage. It's unacceptable. You've not only hurt him, but tarnished the bonds that hold us together as a family. I feel like me and your mom ought to be blamed for what you have become now, and we will no longer let you get away with this behavior anymore. Starting today, I'm cutting you off from the college funds that I set up for you. You can figure out on your own about your university fees. I will also not be funding your lifestyle anymore. You think it makes you more of a man to sleep with married women? Well now, let's see what happens to you when you don't have my money to depend on. I, on the other hand, maintained a composed demeanor throughout all of this. Although I initially wanted to scream at Jake, watching my dad punish him was the ultimate vindication. I had exposed his true nature, and it was clear that he had underestimated the consequences. Jake, persistent in his protests, continued to justify himself. But my father swiftly ended the call, shutting down Jake's attempts to explain away his actions. My mom came up to me and hugged me. It had been a while since we shared such a moment, but in that embrace there was unspoken understanding and support amid the family turmoil. She apologized to me that she had not believed me all this time. I felt like my 14-year-old self would never have imagined this moment, being vindicated and embraced by my mother. After that, my dad helped me find a good lawyer so I could divorce Karen. She and her lawyer tried to fight dirty by asking me for alimony, since I earned more than her. But luckily, her affair played heavily in my favor. We also had a paternity test for my son, and it was determined that Jake was indeed the father of the child. I can't begin to write how painful it was for me to digest this news. It was worse than when Karen told me that she had been cheating on me. I felt so pissed that my son didn't belong to me. However, I guess God works in mysterious ways because I decided to stay strong throughout all this. Karen begged me that I should keep visiting my son, since he should not be punished for all of this. But I just could not bear to see him. He reminded me of Jake, and I hated it. After my divorce was finalized, I was finally free. I moved into my own bachelor pad. It felt surreal living on my own since I had got married so young and never really lived on my own. However, since I had always been independent, I was quick to adapt to my bachelor lifestyle, and I honestly loved that. 2 weeks ago, my dad called me to let me know that he had been thinking of changing his will since he didn't want to give Jake anything. If there's one thing to know about my dad, it is that he is extremely stubborn. Since he had made up his mind that he wanted nothing to do with Jake, he had kept his word. Jake tried to reach out to our parents and even showed up at their doorstep, begging them for forgiveness, but he was not even allowed inside. My mother, who usually caves into Jake's tantrums, also seems to be done with him, although it must be hurting her the most. Throughout all of this, Jake didn't even once send me a text to apologize for what he had done. So clearly, he didn't even regret it. He was just sad about being cut off from our parents. Well, Dad told me that he would be leaving everything behind to me just to ensure that Jake doesn't protest later. He would be leaving him with only $1. My eyes widened in shock as my dad had worked really hard his whole life, including his assets, retirement fund, and life insurance. It would come up to almost $2 million. The only clause in his will was that if my dad passed away before my mom, she would continue to live in their house, even though the ownership would go to my name. Of course, I didn't mind this since I would want to take care of my mom until her last days. I don't know how, but Jake found out about all this. And since he can't reach my parents, he called me yesterday trying to mend things right between us. He told me how he had been having trouble keeping up with college, and that after Karen had found out about the paternity of the child, she had been pestering him about child support. He told me that he had no money and was looking for part-time jobs, yet could not find anything. He begged me to talk to our families so we could start fresh, since he really needed my help. I started to laugh at his face and told him that I was so done with him that he should have thought about all this before sleeping with my wife and getting her pregnant. Jake started to argue that I was being unfair and that she was to blame also, to which I agreed and reminded him how I did divorce her. And now she was his responsibility. So he should not be calling me complaining about her or her child. Since this was the consequence of his own actions, Jake started to raise his voice. But I cut him off and reminded him that he was no longer the favorite child in the family, but the black sheep who slept with his own brother's wife. Jake started to cry at this point and told me how everyone had been sitting on him, including our grandparents and relatives, which was true. But this was no longer my concern. I told him that we were done then to never call me again, since I was no longer his brother. Since then, I have been replaying the conversation over and over in my head. Although I hate my brother, I had never heard him cry, at least not since we grew up. I won't lie, but it did hurt me a bit that he was this helpless. So I guess I am here to ask if I should talk to our parents about him, or would I be an a-hole if I don't? Update 1. Hi everyone. A lot of you have been asking me as to why I am no longer in contact with my son Henry. Some of you have also called me cruel. While I'm sorry to say this, but I don't feel comfortable raising another man's child. This is not a stepson scenario. In this case, I was led to believe that he was my son, and then I discovered that he was in fact my brother's son. Of course, I am hurt, and I have cried over it for days. But then the reason I don't want any contact with Henry is because I no longer want Karen in my life. If I talk to her child, she will find a way to snake her way into my life again, and I need my own space. You can call me cruel or selfish, but I can't see him ever again, or at least until a very long time. Update 2. Most of you have correctly guessed that it was, in fact, my mother who told Jake about my dad changing his will, and he called me as a last resort to mend things. I did confront her in front of my dad, and she broke down. She told me how I had punished Jake enough and that he had learned his lesson. My dad firmly told my mother that if she felt what Jake did was forgivable, then he could no longer stay married to her, since he could never forgive him for his betrayal. His frat seemed to shut my mother up. My dad made it clear to her that if she ever talked with Jake and we found out, then she could pack her bags and just leave him. Like I said, my dad is a very stubborn guy. Hopefully my mother will learn from her mistakes. Update 3. Hi, read it. It's been 5 months since my last update. My relationship with my parents has improved in the last couple of months. My dad and I go golfing every weekend, and he behaves with me more like a buddy than my own father. My mother, even though she misses Jake, has stayed away from him. The last I heard about Jake was from my cousin, who told me how Jake had been asking everyone for money, and in the end had to drop out of college when he could not afford to pay his fees anymore. Him and Karen are living together, and he even has a job as a part-time mechanic, apparently. I think they are raising Henry together, which is a good thing, I guess. I never bring up Jake in my discussion with my parents, and neither do they. So everyone asking, I'm doing quite well. I was promoted at my job 2 months ago, so my salary has improved significantly. I haven't been dating anyone since. I feel like I need time and space to heal. I have been going for a few therapy classes, so I guess we will see how that works out.